Hello everyone, Jules here. Today I'd like to make a video in my astrology topics series, and I'd like to talk about classical or traditional astrology, and I'd also like to talk about some of the differences between classical or traditional astrology compared with modern astrology. And one of the reasons why I'm making the video today is because I've noticed over the last few months that there have been some astrology videos that have been made talking about astrology, but the approach and topics and terms that have been used actually belong to traditional or ancient astrology, and that's not really being clearly stated enough, so that it can be a bit confusing for some viewers who may only know a little bit about modern astrology, and they may not realise that they're actually watching and listening to ancient or traditional astrology. So I thought today I will talk about what ancient or traditional astrology is and what the differences are between that and modern astrology. So just to start with, I want to put this into some historical context, because that helps with the definition of what these different types of astrology are, what the different types are. And don't get too concerned, this won't be a history lesson. This will just be some definitions about the timelines, about what periods these are actually from. Now, traditional astrology can be broken into two main periods. One of them is ancient astrology, which belongs to the Hellenistic period, which is the ancient type of astrology is now being called Hellenistic, and I will define that in a moment. And the second type of traditional astrology is the classical period, and the classical period is from the medieval or Renaissance period up until about 1700. So think about the Middle Ages, medieval, Renaissance times up to about the year 1700. That is the classical period. But the ancient or Hellenistic period, that belongs to the ancient Greek period, starting from the time of Alexander the Great and the empire of Alexander the Great. So that started around the 2nd century BC, or before the Common Era, so that's going back a long way. And that went up until the 2nd century AD, or Common Era. So that was 400 to 500 years of that, but that's ancient times. And the main person who was very important during that ancient or Hellenistic period was Ptolemy, who wrote a very important book about astrology and astrological terms in about 140 AD. So I wanted to talk about those two periods first, and they are the two main periods of traditional astrology. So you've got the ancient Hellenistic period in traditional astrology, or you have got the later classical period, which is medieval Renaissance period up until the year 1700. And then the modern type of astrology starts from at least 1700 on. Modern astrology really started with an astrologer called Leo, and that was in Victorian times. up until now. That's the modern era of astrology. So I wanted to mention this first up so people can get an idea in their heads of what this historical context is really important, because there's different astrological terms and ideas for different periods. So if you're listening to some of these things and you're thinking, this doesn't sound like the astrology that I know a bit about, because the most common type of astrology that most people know a bit about is modern astrology. So just getting that out of the way. I also wanted to talk about this today, where people are hearing or watching some of these videos where some of these ancient terms are being used. And this could be their first learning about astrology. And I just want to mention that the idea of classical astrology or ancient or Hellenistic astrology are specialized fields of astrology. And these types of fields of study were mainly set up in modern times for astrologers who are already qualified. So I know that there are some people who are learning ancient or Hellenistic astrology or classical astrology as their foundational studies, but it is much easier to learn if you have a foundation in modern astrology to begin with. So I want to say that because it's a bit like me telling someone or teaching someone about tarot. And this is the first time they're learning about tarot. And I say to them, oh, okay, I will teach you about tarot through teaching you about Hermetic Kabbalah. So you can get an idea of what that would be like. And the person who's got their first tarot deck or just their first tarot book, they're trying to learn about tarot. And then you are trying to give them ideas and concepts about Hermetic Kabbalah through that approach. You can imagine why somebody would be a bit confused, thinking, why am I not understanding this? Why doesn't this make sense to me? I think you're getting the idea of what I'm saying. Okay, now I think I've talked about the main periods. Now I'm going to talk about some concepts. I want to talk about the difference between equal house and whole house to begin with. So I'm going to make this as simple as I can. Here we have an astrology wheel, a chart, with whole sign houses. That is what is used in ancient or Hellenistic astrology, right? Whole sign houses. Whole sign houses are not usually used in modern astrology. Sometimes they're not even used in classical astrology. They're only used in ancient or Hellenistic astrology, whole sign houses mainly. So whole sign houses are beginning to be flavour of the month. They have been revived in recent years, mainly in America, due to an astrological college called Kepler College, and that is an academic college of astrology. And when they were offering degree courses in ancient astrology, people who qualified with those degrees then started teaching Hellenistic or ancient astrology, and that is using whole signs. Now the idea of whole signs is you have equal divisions of the chart, which is also called houses. They're equal divisions. Now what is different about whole sign? It means that the whole sign is in the division or the house, the whole sign. That means that, let's take for example the sign of Aries. Someone has an ascendant, a rising sign in Aries. That means that the chart is always set at 0 degrees for each of the signs all the way round. 0 degrees at each of the signs. So that if you have an Aries ascendant, for example, and say it's 5 degrees, 10 degrees, whatever it is, it's going to be, the ascendant is going to be placed inside here, inside the sign of Aries, inside the whole house. And the whole sign goes from 0 degrees of Aries until 0 degrees of Taurus. And that's 30 degrees in total. I don't want to get too technical, but the whole sign. So you've got your ascendant, say it's 5 degrees, whatever it is. Anything, whatever it is, it's going anywhere up to 30 degrees of Aries, it's going to be inside the sign, the whole sign. That is a whole sign chart that's only used with Hellenistic or ancient astrology. With most other types of classical astrology or modern astrology, they don't use whole signs, whole astrology signs of the zodiac. They use the ascendant degree. So instead of setting the ascendant at 0 degrees of whatever sign it is, let's just make an example with this. Instead of, this won't be set at 0 degrees. It just won't be, because, well, unless someone happens to have 0 degrees of, just after 0 degrees of Aries in a otherwise modern astrology or classical astrology chart. Let's make this 8 degrees. Instead, 8 degrees of Aries is going to, the ascendant will be right on the cusp of this 8 degrees. It's not going to be in here. It's not going to be in the sign. It's going to be right on the cusp of that first house where the ascendant goes. Whereas if this was whole sign, the 8 degree ascendant would be inside the whole sign area. So I hope you're getting some idea now on the difference between equal house and whole sign. When you are, with this, putting the ascendant right on the cusp of the first house, with equal houses, it means starting from the ascendant, the division of every house after that is going to be 8 degrees. So you've got 8 degrees of Aries for the person who's 8 degrees of Aries, and the next house for the second is going to be 8 degrees of Taurus, then 8 degrees of Gemini, 8 degrees of Cancer, and so on. That is the difference between equal house charts or whole sign, where the 8 degrees of Aries would go inside the first house instead of on the cusp of the first house. Okay, I hope people got some idea about the difference between equal houses and whole signs. And without, one more thing I want to say, with equal houses, the only thing they have in common, equal house and whole sign divisions, is they are still equally divided on the chart, equal spaces for the whole 12 divisions. But the difference is, whole sign is going to have 0 degrees for each of the divisions, each of the houses, but with equal house, it's going to be the degree. It won't be 0, it will be the actual degree on the cusp of the ascendant or first house. But with the whole sign, it's always set at 0 here, and then the ascendant is put inside the first house. Okay, I hope people got some of that. The next point I want to talk about are the planets. Now, with modern astrology, you have the outer planets included in charts. You have the planet Uranus for Aquarius. These are the outer planets. You have Neptune for Pisces, and you have Pluto for Scorpio. These outer planets are not included in traditional astrology or ancient Hellenistic astrology. Classical astrology, usually not either. It's only in modern astrology. Modern astrology has those outer planets, because these three outer planets were discovered after 1700. Uranus was the first one that was discovered after 1700. So that is why those outer planets are usually only included in modern astrology. So anyone who's watching things about classical or ancient or Hellenistic astrology saying, well, why aren't you including Uranus, Neptune and Pluto? That's why it's not included. Okay, the next point I want to talk about is how these traditional planets correspond to the star signs with traditional or classical astrology. So you've got the Sun, which rules Leo. That is the same in any of the systems. That's the same. The Sun ruling Leo. And you have the Moon with the sign of Cancer, the crab. That remains the same. The Moon ruling Cancer, the crab. Now, we're getting to Mercury, and this is where things change in the traditional classical system, Hellenistic, ancient. Here you have Mercury ruling Gemini and Virgo, and that is pretty much staying the same too, but there is some debate in modern astrology about maybe giving Virgo an extra planet. So you've got Mercury ruling two signs. That's very traditional and classical. When I'm using the word traditional, I'm including Hellenistic and ancient in this, okay? So you've got Mercury for Gemini and Virgo. You have Venus ruling Taurus and Libra. These are all the traditional classical. And this is a little bit different in modern too, because there's also a little bit of discussion on whether Eris should be with Libra. So there's Venus ruling Taurus and Libra. And I'm going to have to get a card that's dropped on the floor. And as you can see, I do not edit my videos. Sorry about that. Here we are. That doesn't happen to me very often, but it did today. Now, this is a bit different. Here you have got Mars ruling Aries like it does normally, but it also rules Scorpio in the traditional ancient and classic systems. Pluto's not included, remember? So this is Mars ruling Aries and Scorpio. This is different too. You have Jupiter ruling Sagittarius and Pisces. People would think of Neptune for Pisces, but no, in the traditional, classic, ancient Hellenistic, all of these that are not modern, Jupiter with Sagittarius and Pisces. And last but not least, you have Saturn with Capricorn and Aquarius. Excuse me, I'm having a good day here. Saturn with Capricorn and Aquarius. No Uranus, remember, because Uranus had not been discovered yet. Saturn with ruling Capricorn and Aquarius. So they are all of the traditional planets and rulerships for traditional, classical, ancient, Hellenistic, all of these particular branches of astrology that are not modern, that are pre-1700, that these are these traditional systems and their planets and rulerships. Okay, I suppose the last thing I want to say here is any videos that you do see, and I have seen one recently where it was an astrology video, actually presenting astrology for people who are learning astrology, talking about something called annual perfections and time lords. Now these come out of ancient Hellenistic astrology. Time lords, for me, Time Lords sound like something out of Doctor Who. It sounds like something out of Star Wars. Now, Time Lords are really just the rulers of the signs that we just talked about, the ruling planets of the signs. And yet, in ancient or Hellenistic astrology, they're calling them Time Lords. And annual perfections. As a qualified, experienced astrologer of many years, I'm still not convinced about annual perfections. And believe me, they are not commonly used by most astrologers. And most qualified astrologers, mainly use modern astrology. So, I'm not saying anything here, I'm just comparing. I'm not saying, what people should or should not do or use. I just wanted to point out today, put this in context, what the differences are, where some of these terms come from, just to try to help to make it a bit clearer for people. I hope that I have made this a bit clearer for people. So that's the main thing that I wanted to say for today. I suppose one last thing I wanted to say when I was talking about the difference between whole sign houses and equal houses is that I just used Aries as an example with 0 degrees and 8 degrees and the ascendant things, all of that. That would be the same thing. That would apply to, if the ascendant was on, Taurus, for example. Doesn't have to be Aries. It could be any of the astrology signs where the ascendant happens to be. So I just thought I'd make that additional point as well. Before I go, I'm going to recommend a book about classical astrology. This is not Hellenistic astrology. This is not the, really semi-popular flavour of the month branch of astrology that people want to learn and get interested in. This is classical astrology, and this is probably the best book. This can also be a reference book for people who are learning. And believe me, if it's ancient, Hellenistic or classical astrology, in other words, any kind of traditional astrology that is not modern, there are going to be a lot more terms and concepts to use. It's not as easy to learn, and I'm saying relatively easy to learn as modern astrology. But this book, if you want to learn a few of the foundational terms or concepts or ideas, this is one of the best books around. Understanding the Birth Chart, Astrology, a comprehensive guide to classical interpretation, by Kevin Burk. Here is the book, published by Llewellyn. I hope it's still available. I think it is. This author, Kevin Burk, is an expert on classical astrology. Don't forget that is the later period of the medieval Renaissance time up until the 1700s. This is not the ancient Hellenistic one. And it's very interesting that Kevin Burk does mention whole sign astrology, but he does not use it. Because, what I like about Kevin Burk is that he makes these ideas and concepts clear, and he does point out what the differences are with classical and the difference, versus modern astrology. He also talks a bit about the ancient astrology in here as well, but this is mainly classical, but he does compare the differences to modern. So I really like that about this author. I like the fact that this is a book that has got a lot of information in here, but it is set out in a fairly clear and concise way. But for a lot of people who are learning astrology, at first this might be like a type of reference book for you until you want to look further into things. There's a good index in the back of the book, and the contents in the front of the book, it gives you a good idea of the different chapters and where to start. But I think this is the best concise book on classical astrology around. So I'll put the details about this book below the video, and I hope this has made things a bit clearer about the different types of astrology, especially traditional versus modern, so that you've got a bit of an idea of what some of the differences are and why, because of the historical context. So I'll put the details about the book below the video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.